Before Armine speaks, we're going to show a short video that some of you may have seen as an introduction to her work. EJ.
Conventional economics knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. The convention is to talk about growing a bigger economic pie. Who doesn't want more pie? But why would you settle for pie when you could have layer cake with icing on it? The fundamental layer of the cake has got to be how the planet is doing, because it's the source of all the raw materials. Then the next layer is how we take care of one another. And it's on top of those two things that you can build a physical infrastructure. And then on top of that is actually the economy that we usually talk about, none of which is possible without the previous layers. But we only ever talk about the top layer. The beginning of the 20th century starts with 2 wars and a depression. At the end of it, people recognized that human development and security was incredibly important for well-being. There was a really vigorous debate between, does human development create economic growth, or does economic growth facilitate human development? But around the beginning of the 1980s, the primary public policy has been growing the economy. You give the people that know how to create wealth more money so they can create more wealth for everybody. Yes, they created more wealth, but they kept more wealth. We were told that there was some kind of organic reason for it rather than greed, or the fact that wealthy people can change the rules, and they do. They shield themselves from risk, from financial risk, from social responsibilities, because they're too important to be permitted to fail, and everybody else pays for their failures. But when they succeed, they don't share it. An argument for free markets without also robust public provisions is an argument for inequality. Free market fundamentalists are blind to the other layers that support them. What we have really learned is that my survival depends on your survival. Building up the floor of supports will build up the economy. Better public services and paying people a living wage at the floor of the economy will boost the economy from the bottom up and make people more resilient for whatever happens to them, make them more willing to be innovative and entrepreneurial. None of that is possible in a pie. So why would you settle for pie when you could have cake?
Welcome, Armine.
Tēnā koutou katoa, te pūkinga here tikanga mahi. Tēnā koutou katoa. It is a great pleasure to be with you again after these years of trying to navigate some of the most difficult time in human history. And as you prepare to strengthen your colleagues, your sisters, your brothers, your siblings to move forward, it is a great honor to be able to talk to you about what you need to know to get ready to use your bargaining power better now. So thank you for showing that cute little video. I love that video. I can never see enough of it. I didn't make it, and I had no idea that's how it was going to be dressed up. But it is very important for you to know that I admire what PSA has done over the years. I have learned so much from you, and yet I don't think you're using your bargaining power to its maximum strength. So let me show you why I think that is the case. Oh, am I not going to be able to move forward? I sure hope I can. There we go. So the context in your country and everywhere that had a baby boom after the Second World War is population aging. In the next few decades, we are going to see the smallest working age cohort since the 1960s, and it is going to be happening all over the global north and Australia and New Zealand. And that means bargaining power at the negotiating table and in society is going to be bigger for workers than we have seen in half a century. How are you going to use that power? Right now, we are looking at two-tiered realities, often with greater reliance on newcomers, particularly temporary newcomers. So that might actually interfere with your bargaining power, depending on how you negotiate it, because we're going to need more newcomers. But the more important thing for today is the idea that a population that is aging and a shrinking working age cohort means you're going to need more care in the economy. You're going to need a bigger form of social infrastructure so that the things you need to do to get to work are in place. And that's often you in PSA. So my goal today is to talk to you about the pain points that are coming up and the narrative flips that you're going to need to embrace and propel to get the job done as you move into a very fraught period of political dissent. So let me show you your dependency ratio. This is the number of people that the working age population needs to support. And you see that for the bright blue area is the number of children, and the gray area is the number of people over the age of 65. So people that traditionally have been called too old and too young to work. And this goes back to 1936, and your projections take it out to 2073. And you will see that you had about a 2-decade period that peaked in 1960, where you had the smallest number of people who were working age supporting the biggest number of people who were too young and too old to work. And we've been through a very lovely period from about the mid 80s to very recently, where you haven't seen much change in that relationship. And it has been a period of actually labor surplus, where people have been devalued because workers were a dime a dozen. But you are now moving into an era where labor surpluses are turning into labor shortages, not just in New Zealand, but around the world. And you'll see that the area that what is changing is decades of women getting better educated and having fewer babies. And that's been happening around the world. And longer life expectancy because of really great developments in public health and in healthcare. The two parts of the care economy that are the most important, that also means fewer people working and more people needing help. So this is where the care economy comes in. But I do want to reinforce that this is happening around the world. In fact, China has recently started worrying about the number of workers they have to deal with their population's needs in the future. And that's because of China's one-child policy in the 1980s. Look, if they're worried now about not having enough workers, this is China we're talking about, we should all be sweating bullets in the rest of the world, because the working age population is a shrinking cohort everywhere, which means we will all be competing for newcomers from every corner of the world. That means we have to become both individual workplaces, but communities as a whole and national economies need to become more people magnets to be able to attract the number of people we're going to need to prevent both our quality of life from shrinking and our economy from shrinking. Look, there have been some very predictable labor shortages all over the world when it comes to population aging. In the care economy, which is the combination of health and education services, in New Zealand, you have almost 500,000 workers. That's the latest data we've got. And that part of the economy that is measured in paid work and in lots of economic activity is 10% of GDP. It accounts for over 1 in 5 of every single job you have in New Zealand. The workforce itself is aging, older nurses, older doctors, and there is growing demand by an aging population. So your job postings from the time in August of 2019, before the pandemic hit, to the most recent number, saw a 78% increase in job postings, some of which were totally predictable because of demographics. When we talk about the future of work, we often talk about digital technologies, but we have no idea how they are going to play out, whether they are going to actually relieve demands for labor, whether they're going to substitute labor, or whether they're going to enhance and be complementary to labor. We don't know yet, but we also know there's another area of predictable shortages, which is for the boy jobs, the jobs in construction, in trade, in transit. And there you have almost 260,000 workers in New Zealand, 11% of GDP, but much less of a share of all jobs. But again, an aging workforce and growing demand, and there were very significant increases in job postings since the pre-pandemic period. Look, this gives you a chance to make every job a good job, whether it's high skill or low skill, well paid or poorly paid now. It is an opportunity to make every job a good job. Demographics hands to us on a silver platter the opportunity to improve things. But similarly, public policy and debates can dash our hopes. 6 out of 8 occupational categories in New Zealand are looking for more workers. I bet you know an employer someplace, maybe your own employer, who is looking for more workers. And that means the people who are left doing the job are working harder and longer. That's what burnout looks like. And the fastest growth in demand is for things that we call unskilled, but are in fact low-paid jobs. Again, every job can be a good job. And that's what demographics offers us a chance to do. Right now, we are in the process of looking at the world changing. And your whole conference is about how we are going to shape the future, but you have to understand how the underlying narrative about the future is changing. For my entire career as an economist, the number one thing governments want, it doesn't matter what party you're talking about, is economic growth. And how have we made that desire explicit? We have focused on making better business conditions. What does that mean? It means less barriers for money to move around, lower taxation, and less regulation. In fact, New Zealand led the parade globally in the 1980s with that neoliberal agenda. And that's what we have been told all over the global north that we need to do to attract enough money to make the things we need to make since the 1970s. But after half a century of chasing capital, now, because of demographics, we will also be chasing workers for the next 20 years at least. So what makes a place a people magnet? Better wages, better working conditions, and lots of public services for everybody. Here's another part of flipping the script. For the last 40 years, we've been told that the solution to almost any problem we face is more market and less government. But you can't work with that formula in an era of population aging. In not very long from now, in a decade from now, 1 in 5 resident of New Zealand is going to be aged 65 years of age or older. That's double the share of the 1980s when we were told more market, less government is the formula for success. You are going to need more public services for everybody, for the aged, for the young, because you're going to need all hands on deck of the smallest working age population in history. And people are going to need healthcare, and they're going to need better training, and they're going to need better childcare. They're going to need it all. Okay, let's say that's too expensive. Then the governments and the parties that are trying to get your vote are going to have to be willing to advocate for a falling quality of life. That's really as simple as it gets. So you have an opportunity to say we can actually create a better future by relying on more and better public services where every job in those sectors is a good job and one that anybody would want to do. Of course, it's going to be contested because there's a new contagion in town. Somebody at PSA sent me this beautiful cartoon, and we are seeing it all around the world. We are seeing the rise of racism, of white supremacy, of the inability to understand how reliant we are on one another, and this focus on the so-called focus on freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom to do what? We are so interdependent. That's what the virus taught us, is my health depends on your health. my health depends on how you behave, and your health depends on how I behave. And yet all of this is now in contest. So maybe it's a case of let them eat cake. So the cake video was based, we didn't have time to get into it in a 3-minute video, but the cake video is based on Hazel Henderson's work from 1982. And she says, rightfully, that Mother Nature is the foundational level of any economy. And then she called the next layer the love economy. But what is true is that the love economy is sometimes paid. It's the care economy. So we have both paid and unpaid care. And if we don't provide enough care in the care economy, more women who now make up half of payroll will have to take more time away from work to do the unpaid care. That's what we saw during the pandemic, when schools and hospitals and childcare centers were not functioning enough for people. Women picked up more unpaid work. That isn't a path to the future. So your job is actually more than just asking for better wages and working conditions for your members. Your job in this new environment is to lean into social unionism, which is about advancing the future for everyone. More and better public services, more time off for everybody, less inequality. Each one of those narratives are under attack everywhere around the world. You know, there are labor shortages emerging everywhere because of demographics. And what's the old chestnut we're all hearing over and over again? Nobody wants to work anymore. Well, we've all heard that, and you'll hear a lot more of that. That inflation is due to wages, workers being too greedy, and that people that are refusing to work in terrible jobs because they have a choice of working in a better job are doing quiet quitting, or having too high expectations for themselves. Look, anti-worker sentiments are going to be rising just at the time when we need workers more. You've got to be prepared for that. And you have to understand that unions, in an era where justice departments, where democratic institutions, where everything that supports people is under attack, unions are the last bastion of democratically controlled, decentralized activity where you can campaign for social change, where you can campaign to make the world better for not only yourself, but those around you. So your words, your actions, your campaigns could be the beginning of all the change we are looking for. You know, it was 150 years ago in Canada where the short hour movement wound up sending 24 printers to jail. And Toronto saw 6 weeks after these printers were sent to jail for having the audacity of asking for a 9-hour workday, which was a global movement to shorten the working day, because around the world in the 1870s, we were dealing with another labor shortage, broad-based for reasons I won't get into right now. But the idea that these people were thrown into jail for the audacity to ask for a shorter working day led to 2,000 people marching in the streets demanding their release. Well, that 2,000 people marching in the streets of Toronto in Canada in 1872, by the time they got to Queen's Park, which is our provincial legislature, it was 10,000 people that were supporting them at a time when Toronto only had a population of 100,000 people. We made a difference back then. We actually instituted the very first Labor Day as a statutory holiday, the second in our history. And that started a process of changing labor laws and labor rights. The care economy now needs that kind of pressure to make sure that it is very clear to everybody that hears you that the care economy is as important to infrastructure so that the economy can proceed, every bit as important as roads and bridges. The phrase in Canada has been, we go to work so you can go to work. And it's really important for us to understand that demographic change will be portrayed as a problem. Labor shortages are terrible things. Well, indeed, they can be terrible things, but it's also an opportunity to make every job a good job. And let us remember that time is always money. We all need more paid leave, especially as we move into an era where this shrinking working age cohort is going to need to do way more lifting of those who are too old, too young, and too sick to work. Everybody wants good work, and that's your campaign. And that's what I hope you can help us understand, that you've got the power to change things. And without you, nothing is going to change. Thank you for letting me be part of your experience of this remarkable conference. And in closing, I'd like to say, I hope I get this right. Na mihi nui ke a koto, ki a koto. Thank you very much.